Hi guys, welcome to the third video in the series on our rules. In this one I'll be covering combat. So combat actually falls under three headings for ALP. Combat itself, in the general terms, and then situations applicable to both melee combat and shooting combat. So first of all, the general sort of like combat rules. The rules for the combat rules for ALP are very, very simple. Units are given, when I find the right units, armour ratings, such as these. Let's grab those ones there. 4, 6, and some Roman legionnaires there, which are 3, 5. Oh, it's first bear Romans. So the numbers are really simple. So there's the first number is the number you have to get below on a D6, and the second number is the number you have to get below on a D8. It is simple as that. So this unit, so Celts at the back have an armour of 6, 8. If your attacking unit rolls a D6, you have to get below the 6. If it rolls a D8, you have to get below the 8. The number you roll below these numbers is how many casualties you inflict. So against the Celts, if I rolled a 3, I'd cause 3 casualties on that base. If I'm rolling a D8 against them, and I roll a 5, I cause 5 casualties on the base. It is that simple. As you can see, Celts in melee, or unarmoured troops in melee, are going to get pretty badly damaged, whereas Roman legionnaires in heavy armour with shields, with an armour of 3, 5, they're going to be fairly resilient. You're going to struggle to cause more than 2 casualties on them at any one time if you're only rolling a D6, and you're going to struggle to cause more than 4 casualties if you're rolling a D8. So, what units roll D6s and D8s? Pretty much all units roll D6s, and there will be some limited units that roll D8s. There will be, however, he says, where is it? Devastating Charge. There we go. Cards like this one, Devastating Charge. It only applies to cataphracts, chariots, and elephants. He says it in the wrong order. Actually only applies to heavy chariots. That's been changed. So on those units, when they charge, or when they fight in melee, the unit rolls a D8 combat dice on the turn it charges. So you can cause more casualties on the charge with those units when you play that card. And that's the combat rules in a nutshell. There are obviously modifiers that apply to that, so I get these out of the way. And I'll use the Romans, as they have the best armour. So these guys have 3, 5 armour from the front. If you attack them in the side, their armour goes up by 1 point to 4, 6. And if you attack them in the rear, their armour goes up by 2 points to 5, 7. Kind of simple. Some units have charge bonuses. So for instance, the Celts have a charge bonus. So if they charge the 3, 5 Romans, then in the turn that they charge, the Romans' armour drops to 4, 6. And of course, on top of that, you have cards that can be played as well that can further reduce armour and so on, or therefore potentially give you more casualties that you can cause. So if you have, on this charge, their armour modified to 4, 6, and you roll a 4, you do nothing. So 4 and upwards, no effect. If you're on the D8 and you roll 6 or upwards, you do nothing. Which is why, when the Romans have 3, 5 armour in ordinary melee, they're a tough nut to crack. You have to do all sorts of hinky stuff to them to do damage. Now there are units in the game that have 2, 4 and 1, 3 armour, and those tend to be units such as Gothic Knights would have the 1-3 armour. Knights from the mid to late medieval period, 2-4 armour. Cataphracts, some of the heavier cataphract types have 2-4 armour. Some elephants have 1-3 and 2-4 armour. Most elephants, however, have 3-5 armour. So any roll of a natural 1, either on a d8 or a d6, he says put down a different dice, so either on a d8 or a d6, always does 1 casualty, regardless. And on the flip side of that, if you ever roll the maximum, that bounces, as we say anyway, bounces off the armour and does nothing. Now in some situations, if attacking Celts for instance, or not just Celts but any unit with a 6-8 starting armour, it is possible to nudge their armour even higher still. So if you had the Romans playing a different multitude of charge cards that allow them, I don't know, say in the end an additional +3 on their attack, the Celts armour would have crept up from the 6-8 to, what's that, 9-11. That means, in that situation, you'd roll the dice and you'd add 3 to your final score, because you're 3 points higher. If you roll a 5, that modifies up to an 8. If you roll the 6, that modifies up to the unit's armour and bounces off again. So you still have, roll a 1, it would go up to 4, therefore. So at both ends of the scale, you have the worst roll now does an awful lot of damage to them, and the highest roll still has no effect. That's pretty much everything covered. There was something just then, that's why I shut down briefly. Right, so that was it. The next step. Every unit in the game can take 8 casualties. Every unit, that's not true. Every base in the game can take 8 casualties. So if a base takes 8 casualties, it's removed from the game. This is where, again, mentioned in previous video, where support is important. If the Romans do 7 casualties, we'll say, to this base, that still means that there's 1 casualty left on the base. In the Celtic player's turn, he can shuffle those casualties backwards down the unit. Now, I'm currently looking around the table for my damage markers, and I can't see this one. So we use red tokens for 3 wounds or damage, and these tiny yellow ones for 1 damage. So let's do this differently. 5 casualties will be shown by putting 3, 4, 5 on there. At the start of the Celt player's turn, he gets to shift those casualties back however he wants. He can split this 3 down into 1, so you can have 2, 2 and 1 if you wanted to. Or you can put all 5 casualties on that rear base. Casualty movement in this game is, it sounds a bit hinky and a bit awkward when first mentioned, but it's actually quite a large part of the game. Not just because it's how you damage units, but it's also how you manage your units in the game. If you make a mistake doing this, you kick yourself. If you forget to move the casualties at the start of your activation, you kick yourself. If your opponent managed to exploit the damage being done, so if this unit here, for instance, had this base, sorry not unit, had 4 damage against it, and then he managed to charge it in the flank with another unit and attack that base, you know, it gets painful. But it's a major facet of the game, rather than it being more on the modern lines where you sort of add damage in to a unit as a whole, or even to a formation as a whole, and is marked with tiny little markers that are easily done. This is a far more intricate manner of damage and damage control within your units. It's exciting in game when this starts happening, and you start having to work out which bases can take damage and which ones can't, and how it all sort of flows together in the end. It's good fun. This is a really good part of the game. So, what else about basic combat can I tell you? Not a lot really. That pretty much covers it. After that we sort of start getting into the melee styles of combat and the shooting damage and that sort of thing. A couple of quick other points. Half bases. So here, artillery and skirmishers. They are half bases. So what that means is they only have 4 damage points as compared to the 8 damage points of a normal base. That's important because once you actually hit the 4 damage to a base, you have negatives on your attack rolls, -1. So these units always have -1s when shooting. You get round that with certain special rules for skirmishes, which I'll cover later, and artillery only really applies when they're in melee, so I'll get to that again later as well. But yeah, that kind of covers it. Next video I will cover shooting and melee, and then after that we'll go straight into morale, and that basically, with those 5 videos that'll be up, will be the complete basics of At Lance's Point. Cheers guys, talk to you all soon, thank you, bye.